Robert Enright's Forgiveness is a Choice is built on a simple but demanding premise. Resentment is not just an emotion that happens to us, it is a condition we actively live inside, and forgiveness is a deliberate path out of it. Enright, a clinical psychologist and one of the founders of modern forgiveness research, writes with the calm authority of someone who has spent decades listening to people who have been deeply wronged. The book opens by validating anger rather than rushing past it. He insists that resentment is often morally justified, especially when injustice has occurred, and that any approach to forgiveness that skips this truth risks becoming shallow, coercive, or harmful. The storytelling in the book centers on real people who have been wounded in ways that feel impossible to forgive: betrayed spouses, abused children now grown, victims of violence, people abandoned or humiliated by those they trusted most. Enright does not dramatize their pain for effect. Instead, he lets their internal struggles carry the narrative. Through their stories, the reader sees how resentment quietly reshapes identity, narrowing emotional range and anchoring the self to the offense. Forgiveness is introduced not as a moral obligation to the offender, but as a choice to reclaim one's own inner life. A key idea woven throughout the book is the distinction between forgiveness and reconciliation. Enright returns to this repeatedly because so many people resist forgiveness out of fear that it means reopening themselves to harm. Through patient explanation and case examples, he shows that forgiveness is an internal process that can occur even when reconciliation is unsafe, unwanted, or impossible. Forgiveness does not require forgetting, excusing, or minimizing what happened. It requires seeing clearly what happened and choosing not to let it define the rest of one's emotional future. The heart of the book is Enright's forgiveness process model, which unfolds like a psychological journey rather than a set of techniques. In the early phase, readers are invited to explore their anger honestly, including the ways it leaks into relationships, health, sleep, and self-esteem. Through stories, Enright illustrates how people often underestimate the cost of holding onto resentment until they begin tracing its ripple effects. This stage is uncomfortable, because it removes the illusion that anger is only harming the offender. The reader is gently guided to see how resentment has become self-punishing. As the process deepens, the book shifts toward decision-making. Forgiveness emerges as a conscious commitment rather than an emotional breakthrough. Enright is careful here, emphasizing that this decision does not require feeling forgiving. Instead, it involves choosing to explore forgiveness as an experiment in healing. In several stories, people make this choice reluctantly, driven not by compassion for the offender but by exhaustion with their own bitterness. This honesty gives the book much of its credibility. The work phase of forgiveness is where Enright's psychological depth becomes most evident. Readers are guided to slowly, sometimes painfully, expand their understanding of the offender as a flawed human being rather than a symbol of evil. This does not mean denying responsibility. Instead, it means separating the person from the act. Through vivid therapeutic narratives, Enright shows how people begin to uncover the offender's own wounds, limitations, or histories without excusing the harm done. This reframing often triggers resistance, which the book treats as a natural part of the process rather than a failure. One of the most powerful aspects of the book is its insistence on self-respect. Forgiveness is never framed as self-erasure. In many stories, people only begin to forgive after they have fully honored their own worth and suffering. Enright emphasizes that recognizing one's inherent value makes forgiveness possible because it removes the need to extract worth from revenge or moral superiority. Forgiveness becomes an act of strength rather than submission. As the process continues, emotional shifts begin to occur, often subtly at first. Enright describes moments when people notice their anger softening, their intrusive thoughts losing intensity, or their emotional reactions becoming less explosive. These changes are not portrayed as sudden transformations but as gradual loosening. Through careful storytelling, the reader sees how forgiveness reshapes the inner landscape over time, creating space for peace without erasing memory. A recurring theme in the book is grief. Forgiveness, Enright argues, often requires mourning what was lost and what will never be restored. Several stories focus on people who could not fully forgive until they allowed themselves to grieve unmet needs, broken trust, or stolen innocence. This grief is portrayed not as weakness but as an essential step toward emotional freedom. Without it, forgiveness risks becoming intellectual rather than transformative. The later stages of the book explore the unexpected gifts that sometimes arise from forgiveness. These are not presented as guaranteed rewards, but as possibilities. People report feeling lighter, more compassionate toward themselves, or more resilient in the face of future wounds. Some find that forgiving deepens their sense of meaning or aligns them more closely with their values. Enright is careful to note that forgiveness does not always bring reconciliation or closure, but it often brings a quieter, more durable form of peace. Throughout the book, Enright grounds his storytelling in research without making it feel academic. Studies are woven into the narrative as confirmation of what the stories reveal. Forgiveness can reduce anxiety, depression, and anger, while improving psychological well-being. The science serves the human experience rather than overshadowing it, reinforcing the idea that forgiveness is not just morally admirable but psychologically sound. One of the most compelling qualities of the book is its patience. Enright repeatedly reassures readers that forgiveness cannot be rushed and that setbacks are part of the journey. Several stories involve people who abandon the process and return to it months or years later. These accounts normalize ambivalence and protect the reader from the shame of not being ready yet. By the end, forgiveness is portrayed less as a destination and more as a way of relating to one's past. The offense does not disappear, but it loses its power to dominate identity and emotion. Enright's language becomes quieter here, reflecting the inner stillness many of his subjects describe. Forgiveness, in this sense, is not dramatic, it is stabilizing. The final impression the book leaves is one of grounded hope. Forgiveness is not romanticized, spiritualized beyond recognition, or reduced to a quick fix. It is presented as hard psychological work that requires courage, honesty, and time. Yet the stories make clear that this work can fundamentally change how a person carries their pain. Ultimately, forgiveness is a choice argues that resentment keeps us emotionally tethered to those who hurt us, while forgiveness loosens that bond. The book does not promise that forgiving will make life fair or wounds vanish. What it promises, and delivers through story after story, is the possibility of living with greater freedom, dignity, and inner coherence after injustice.